This podcast is rated S for spoilers. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Half Past Podcast. This is a bonus episode of Maze Runner: The Death Cure.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
Yep. I'm Graham Rickson. Here with me is my friend and co-pilot. Did you hear there? Ian Jones.
Ian, I forgot we had a podcast until 10 minutes ago, Jones. Because I was in the car on my way to the pharmacia.
Nice.
And I was like, oh, good. Oh, good. This is good. Yep.
Nice.
So, no, I had to disappoint my fiance. I didn't get what I was supposed to, and I didn't get the cinnamon.
Nice.
At Target. So I'm on a mission after this.
Oh, well, it's always good to have a mission. I like when you start a mission and you go forward when you have a task to get done. The thing that's going to be interesting, because if this happens to you, this is what I call a real mission. And that's when you go to the pharmacy or wherever you need to go, and they don't have what you want. Then it turns into a mission. Because you have to figure out what you have to go to, like, multiple locations to figure it all out. And you've embarked on a journey at that point in time.
And journeys always change us. That's why I love movies so much.
I love the segue. So speaking of these journeys here, so the last podcast we did Spider-Man, and we decided to finally finish the trilogy of Maze Runner.
Yes.
So the third one we just seem to never get recorded, man. So today we are going to get to that one, Maze Runner: The Death Cure. So this podcast, I think, is going to be great. The Maze Runner series has been near and dear to the Half Past Podcast pretty much since its inception. It was the very first thing we ever recorded, and we recorded it in your apartment.
Yep.
With all the crazy echo and everything, and with zero experience whatsoever.
Getting into arguments, trying to figure out the formatting.
Yep. Everything, man.
Yeah.
And we recorded everything, and Maze Runner was the very first thing, and it was not even the first episode because we had so many little issues, but it was definitely a good way to test run how to get everything done. And so we ended up doing that episode. That very first episode is a bonus episode from a while ago that you absolutely can listen to, and it's kind of fun to hear the difference between what we are now and what we were back then.
Is fun the right word? Yeah.
So with that said, the Maze Runner series has been really near and dear to us, which is funny because it hasn't been near and dear to America.
Hey, I think it's done okay, but I mean, it's, it
has made money. It absolutely has made money. Yes. So the thing is the entire series has had a fairly low budget. Each movie, I think this one was the most expensive one, and I think it was about $65 million. But it made like 130 or something like that. So the series as a whole has always made money. The thing that's funny is it's like the forgotten version of this dystopian things, because while this is going on, Divergent has happened, and Hunger Games has happened, and those are widely more like successful in terms of how much money they make in and how many people have seen them. Not a lot of people have seen any of these Maze Runner movies, which is really sad because at the very least the first one is actually pretty good. Like, it's a good movie. It's like a solid movie. I think we're getting into this already, but I think it progressively gets worse from the first movie down to the third movie. But I think as a series, I think it's a solid series considering it's one of these like young adult fiction turned movie series.
Yeah.
You know?
and it is built on a cast of relatively unknowns. You don't have big movie stars in it. You know, all the money is put into the visuals that are there, the production that's there. And so I think that the thing that I will say about this, and maybe I should save it, but since you mentioned it,
yeah, let's go ahead.
Is the very first movie, because there's the maze, because there's this overwhelming presence. I think there's something about it that, in a way, is disturbing, but is also comforting. You know, it all takes it is all, and it's weird to describe it that way. But it's all very self-contained, and so you get to really understand all the characters. There's less moving parts to it, and so in that way, I think there's a more emotional connection to that first movie because you want to see them get the hell out of there.
Yes, you do.
And one of the things that I liked is that there is a flashback where Minho wakes up and he's back in the maze, which has got to be the most terrifying thing that you could dream about.
Yes.
So I think the first movie in that sense has an advantage over the next two.
Yes.
And
you're absolutely correct.
I would almost liken it, even though my favorite was the sequel, I would almost liken it to the Matrix trilogy, where I think that first movie is contained. They kind of hint at other stuff, but you don't see what it's going to be. And then I think when a lot of people saw what it was, when they really saw Zion and saw what was going on, I think a lot of people took issues with that. And that's, that's because you get a picture of something in your head and it isn't quite, then when they go through it, it's not quite what you imagined it might be.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, and it's tough to just recapture something that's so original. And I think the Maze Runner idea for the first book and the first movie is really original.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's tough to keep that, like, how do you replace the fact that they're, not in that maze anymore, that there isn't that fifth character or whatever.
Yeah.
How do you recapture that magic? And that's a very tough thing for filmmakers when they're doing trilogies.
Yes, I think you're absolutely correct, and I think your explanation, your comparison to the Matrix trilogy, I think is incredibly accurate to what we're seeing in the Maze Runner. I think it's the same type of thing that's happening. I totally agree. That's great. It's been an interesting process, and so we're gonna start talking about this movie. And other than the fact that it's near and dear to the Half Past podcast, we've obviously we're going to discuss all of the movies as a whole, including the third movie. So I think it'll be really fun to let's just like get into this and really just talk about it. So basically, the only thing I want to basically just give a quick synopsis is this is the continuation of the entire series. We have basically the movie ends. The second movie ends where you lose Minho. You find out that Teresa has been working with them the whole time, so they get betrayed, and they end up coming across the group of people that are trying to save these kids. And so this movie starts what seems to be a few weeks after the end of the second movie. And so it's directed by the same guy. So all three movies are directed by Wes Ball, and Dylan O'Brien, of course, is the main character. And we've had this whole time period through this movie, or through all these series, is we've had a multitude of different characters that have shown up and have left, and it's been like such a good series of people that we're trying to come up with here. Really lost for words right now.
It's okay.
Oh man. So let me continue with the cast here. So we have Dylan O'Brien. We have King Hung Lee as Minho, which has been our favorite character throughout the whole series.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I love him in this movie too. And we lost him in the second movie, and I still remember that dang time period in the second movie where you thought you lost him during the lightning storm, and you're just like, you better not kill off Minho. And then, like, I feel like the filmmakers knew Minho was going to be a popular character, because I swear, in the second movie, you thought you were going to lose him in the lightning storm. And then he comes back, and then he gets taken away at the end of the second movie also. And you're just like, dang it, man, what's happening with Minho? And then finally you kind of get this resolution at the end and with this movie. And so the other character that's been in all the movies is Kaya Scodelario, who has plays Teresa. She is the one that we've mentioned multiple times, looks a lot like Kristen Stewart. And
right.
And it's really awkward to see her in some scenes, because Kristen Stewart is not the best actor to watch through a bunch of movies. So it's just like really rough. Thomas Brody Sangster is the next one with Newt, and he has a bigger role in this movie. And I think that's one of the things I liked about this movie, is having that character kind of take a little bit more involvement into the movie. You also have Dexter Darden as Frypan. You have Will Poulter as Gally, who was a pleasant surprise to show back up into this movie. I was so shocked to see Gally show up in this movie, and we'll talk about this a little bit later when we get into it. But Will Poulter as Gally, he was my favorite character in the first movie. Oh. And so he was one of my favorite characters. Obviously Minho's my favorite, but I liked Gally as like this antagonist. It was just so cool to have him there. Then you have basically Jacob Laughlin as Iris. We have Rosa Salazar as Brenda, who was in Alita. She was Alita in Alita Battle Angel.
Oh, was she?
That's her.
All right.
Yes, Rosa Salazar is Alita from Alita Battle Angel. So that was her huge role, and hopefully she gets more roles. I believe Alita did well enough to where a sequel might happen. I don't know, but I think it did well.
I really enjoyed it. I know
thought it was
Annie
a good movie.
did not. But what's that?
I thought it was a good movie.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. I believe we did a podcast on Alita, didn't we?
It's weird. Yeah, we did.
I thought we did do a podcast. I'm pretty sure we did a podcast. They're starting to just blur
my memory
together.
Is sawdust.
And then you have Giancarlo Esposito, who plays Jorge, who's just mainly known for Breaking Bad and a lot of other like bit parts in movies and TV shows for like his whole career. He's always great in everything he's in. Patricia Clarkson as Ava Page, and then Aidan Gillen as Jansen. So you have, Baelish, Lord Baelish in this movie also again. So I'm going to go ahead and let's just take a break so I can get my words together.
Okay.
So I can get this figured out, and then we can go ahead and start the quirks and likes and really just start talking about this movie and the series as a whole.
Wonderful.
Oh, man. Alright, Jones, we're back for the Quirks and Likes section. I am going to pass this over to somebody who's been a little more articulate than I have.
Wonderful.
At the beginning of this podcast. So let's go ahead and get you started, and I will try to get my words together.
Okay. Well, I was hoping you wouldn't do this to me this time.
Nice!
But let's see what I got here. All right. Little tip of the sweet cow hat.
Yep, nice.
Okay, all right. I think the first thing is, the first quirk that I have is, it's tough for me to tell what sort of time jump there is, and I think you hit the head on the nail that it seems like maybe it was only a few weeks.
Yes.
There are times it feels longer than that. And the problem that I have with how they did these three movies is they did them in a way to where you almost need to watch them back to back to back.
Yes.
In order to really appreciate them, because there are so many moving parts in the second and third films, even though they're thrillers, and in terms of plot and everything. I think it's a relatively simple thing to follow, but they layer it in ways with these different characters where everyone's got different motivations, and throughout all three films, they are trying to get the audience to care about each of these characters for different reasons.
Yes.
And to relate to them. But I think where the quirk comes in is there were times when I was just lost because they were referencing things that were in the second movie, and I think the second movie is a little bit harder to follow 2 years later. Yes, so I really felt like I should have gone back and watched that second one, because I have seen The Maze Runner a couple of times, so I'm good there. So whenever they reference something out of the first Maze movie, that's great to me. But whenever they talk about the second one, that's a little bit more of a jumbled mess for me.
Yes, yeah, I have seen the second movie twice. I've probably seen the first movie 3 times. So I have a varied opinion on them, just in terms of like my experience in watching them. And I feel like you're absolutely correct. I think the second one is really hard to follow. And I think that you're also correct where I kind of, now that you said this, which is kind of funny, I kind of want to do a Maze Runner marathon and just blitz through all 3 of them back to back and just kind of see how the whole story works, because I have the same sort of quirk in my list here about with this third movie, where you absolutely kind of get lost. You get lost in this movie and you're like, what is some of this stuff doesn't quite make sense, because you're starting to add these, because you already in the second movie you already started adding in the group of people that are essentially fighting Wicked to gather all these kids up and save them from their fate of just being essentially experimented on by Wicked. And after that, you add in this third movie, those characters are still there and are still a prominent part of the movie, but you also have this other group that are living like outside of the walls where Wicked is located at. And these people are not involved with either group. So it's like this extra group that's there to where this is like what I'm assuming is just like the normal people that are just living, that are just trying to survive day to day. And you don't really get much of that in the second movie. You meet them, of course, but in the third movie, you actually see that there's like this group of people, and then you have this like character that's brought up that has, that essentially is basically a revolutionary that wants to like go through this wall and do all this other crap. And so you're just like, this extra little layer, you're just like, man, so it gets more and more confusing, I think, as each movie gets released. So I totally understand what you mean.
Especially since, and I'm not seeing his name on here, but the guy who was Gus on Breaking Bad.
Oh, yes, yep.
So,
Jorge.
Jorge, okay.
Yes.
Because he is introduced as one of the leaders of the resistance in the second film.
Yes.
His role to me here was just a little bit strange, and this is kind of my second quirk, because there is this whole other leader just outside the city walls.
Yes.
And it just felt odd to me that there's this huge gap between where the outer city ends and the city walls begin. And
yes.
no one is ever venturing between those spaces, with the exception of when they finally decide to charge the walls, and then they all get shot, and you probably see why. But it doesn't seem to me like that the city was actually prepared to shoot their own, well, not their citizens, but other humans. You know,
yes.
Like, I don't understand why they wouldn't be trying to save as many people as possible when very clearly you need humans in order to survive. Like, you know, the infected are outnumbering everyone else.
Yes.
So why aren't they helping these people outside the gates? Like, none of that is really getting talked about, other than once you see how the people inside the gates live, you start wondering, well, how are they feeding themselves? Why are they dressing in suits and ties and going to work and pretending like the outside world isn't dying around them?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's just, it's weird. And that's that kind of dystopian vibe that when this happens in movies and in TV shows, that you kind of wonder why people are behaving the way that they are. You know, like the fact that they're still putting on suits and going into work every day when they probably don't need, you know, they need to all be working towards a cure if we're going to survive. And it just doesn't seem like they're united on that front.
Yeah, and I think that's another one of the problems you have when you start doing these novels turn movies, because I feel like maybe that is explained better when you have more time in a book to kind of show that these people are on another level more evil than they're perceived in the movies. The only experience you have with the people on the inside of the walls is what we saw in this third movie and what we know about Wicked. Everything else we don't know anything else of why they're not working towards anything else. We just don't know. That might get explained better. Maybe these are elite people that are doing it, but even then you get this problem with the Jansen character, where it seems like he, by the end of this movie, wants to be a part of this elite, but you're not really sure if that's the reasoning behind it.
Behind his actions.
Behind his actions, which is the other problem, which is another quirk that I have about this movie, is Jansen's actions make almost no sense to me. I do not know what his motivation is pretty much by the end of this movie. I'm just like, well, first of all, I'm not exactly sure why he decides to finally kill Ava Page. Like, he decides to kill her.
Yeah. Which seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's right? She's like, basically, well, Teresa has figured this out. We have this cure here. Let's get this taken care of. And then he kills her. And you're just like, well, wait a minute. Why would you kill her? Like, she was...
And he would have killed Teresa and Thomas, too. Even though Thomas is the one with the cure. So that's really, you know... It really is a little, like, you just start wondering about that.
It's rough. It's my biggest quirk probably was essentially the end of this movie but definitely my biggest quirk through the whole thing, because first of all, it absolutely gets really messy at the end of this movie. You have this absolutely ridiculous plan that they decided to cook up, where the plan was to have Fry Pan get a crane and pick up the bus and move it to the outside walls and drop it down. That was the original plan, because there's no other reason why you would have Fry Pan go, like, not be with them. That was his assignment, which means they were choosing to do that in the first place, which is like, to me, is just like, what are you
he really
insane?
Had to take a back seat, didn't he?
Yeah, he had to take a back seat, and he did this. And so along with that, you have this extra layer. You find out that what is that character's name? Oh, it escapes me for a second. Newt.
Yeah.
You have Newt. You have this extra layer of Newt where he's infected he's like turning. So there you have that extra layer that really shows up at the end of the movie. You have the issue with Teresa finally figuring out that Thomas is the secret to the cure at the end of the movie, which again doesn't make any sense because they had Thomas. They had him the whole time. They had him through, like, when you watch the first movie, he's sit there and you find out that he escapes. So, but they had him before he escaped. They had him. So, like, you're trying to figure out did they not test his blood before? Why wouldn't they test his blood before? It made no sense because he obviously was working with trying to fix the cure with Teresa. You find that out in, like, the first and second movie. So you're just trying to figure out, well, why?
Why did things change?
What did things change? When did it change? And did they never actually test his blood to begin with? It's like such a weird thing, and then you add on this extra layer with Jansen trying to take her out, and then you have their initial plan when they're trying to get Brenda to essentially work with Jorge to fly them out of there. Like, it just gets really messy at the end of the last, like, 15 minutes of that movie. Of Death Cure gets really jumbled, and it's like everything jumps to crazy. They even change their mind whether they're going to go back like 2 or 3 times. Like, Thomas says, he's like, no, Thomas is like, we could go back, and then he goes, no, we're going to go forward, and then Thomas goes back anyway. It's just like that kind of stuff kept happening at the end of the movie, and it really gets messy.
Well, speaking of getting messy, there is something that keeps like every time they're backed into a corner, something inexplicably comes to save the day.
Yes.
And in a way that I think is like ruins the whole suspension of disbelief for me. Like, first of all, how is it that there are this many pilots among the outlayer rebels or whatever the hell they're called?
Right? Yeah.
How are there this many people who know how to fly aircraft to keep saving the day, getting them out from above? Like, it's just like every time they're in a corner where it's like, well, there's no way out of this, something comes from above. Yep. And you kind of mentioned it with the crane, but that was part of the plan. I don't really get, there were a couple of times where they were just airlifted to safety, and I'm just like, well, how did these guys know how to fly?
I mean, how did Frypan know how to operate a crane?
Right. I mean, it's just, it can't be, you know.
It would have been great if there was, like, a couple of scenes. Like, this is one of those things that could be solved fairly easily, and maybe it's said in the second movie, because I can't remember the second movie as much as I would like to. But it would be nice if they explained that they were, like, ex-military, and that would kind of explain why they kind of have this sort of knowledge. But definitely, Frypan knowing how to operate a crane has, like, that's... What? Like, that's not... all of these people couldn't remember just about anything.
Just don't think about it. Yeah. Just don't pull that thread.
Right? It's just kind of a weird thing. But, I don't know. It's crazy. It gets messy. So
yeah, I do think not really understanding the bad guy's motive, and maybe not focusing on one bad guy in general, on Jansen's character, is a bigger issue. The other thing that I thought was weird, that I wasn't sure how to feel about it when it happened, but when those outsiders do breach the walls, they go into the city and they freaking torch everything. They start bringing down buildings. Everything. I mean, they're killing people, and this essentially what you're seeing there is the end of the human race. That's the last human city.
Yes,
that's it. You know, I didn't understand that part of it either. And I wasn't sure how to feel about it. I wasn't sure who was in the right and who was in the wrong here, because none of it is given any context.
No.
And I think it's one thing if they went in there trying to find food and resources and help. I don't know. I don't get what the real motivation was there.
I think what you just said, for me, explains the final ending to this movie, which is essentially, it's the end of the human race, and the only people that have survived are essentially the people who are resistant to the flare. And they've gone onto an island, and they're going to just live out their ways through there, and maybe progressing the human race from there. Because the other issue I have with this movie is they kill the only person that knows about the cure. They kill everybody who knows about the cure except for Thomas and the group at the end of the movie. And then none of them are scientists or have equipment to spread the cure.
Yeah, to administer it or replicate it.
Or replicate it or anything. So what ends up happening is Teresa dies in a blaze of glory, falling down in a flaming building and just like everything getting destroyed around her. And she was the last hope. There was nothing else left after her because they destroy everything, like you were saying. And so the conclusion of the movie is essentially nothing gets cured. That, like, there is no cure for the flare, and I guess humans pretty much have had their chance. And the only result is whoever happens to live that are resistant to it. But I feel like at that point in time, I mean, like, what do you do? Like, what happens on this island? If this island is like the last group, that means the flare is everywhere else. And because we've seen people change that we didn't know change, that means that since there's no more cure either, then that means the flare is on that island too. So the only thing I can think of is the only thing that shows that maybe the flare can still be cured through simple means is when you have Brenda's character, who was definitely infected, and I cannot for the life of me remember what happened in the second movie to where Thomas's blood is involved with her, and that's why she is fine.
Right. I think it was a blood transfusion, but
Did she have a blood transfusion?
I don't remember. I could be so wrong about that.
Yeah, and because I don't remember that very well either. So again, this is the other issue what we're talking about with the way this kind of gets jumbled up. Seeing these movies, I think the best way to watch these movies is through one big marathon, so that a lot of this probably makes more sense. But there's not, that scene at the end of the movie also doesn't happen. So like, it's not like you're like, they're not taking Thomas's blood and administering it to anybody. They're not, like, that doesn't happen. So to me, it's just like the ending is really kind of this weird, somber ending to a series, and you're just like, well, crap, I don't know what to feel, I don't know what to think about by the end of this movie.
You know, yeah, I think that maybe makes the final scene with Thomas, which was actually one of my likes, but I think that kind of, I don't know, it hurts that final shot.
Yes.
Of him. You know, the fact that I think that there are just so many question marks, and
oh yeah,
you know, that I think that could have been what Wes Ball wanted to do, but
yeah,
is that satisfying for the audience? And I don't think it is.
I don't think it is either.
I don't think, you know, having the deaths of Newt and Teresa, you know, and I understand there had to be sacrifices there.
Yes.
But, yeah, and, you know, the fact that it was them, it was two of the original, cast members, and you notice that none of the newer ones had that fate because we don't care about them. Yes. And that's just one of those things where I'm like, maybe we needed fewer characters, like everyone had a little bit of a part to play, but it just doesn't get driven home. It ends up being about Thomas, Minho, Teresa, and Newt for different reasons.
Yeah, all of them for different reasons. Yeah.
So anyway, that's it for me as far as quirks go.
Okay, I think we've talked through all of the quirks. Yours kind of led into mine, and I made my comment, so let's just start talking about the likes. I do have some, so...
Do you want to go
first? Okay, I'll go first.
Okay.
So, I actually enjoyed the beginning of this movie. It's kind of a weird thing, but having this like heist beginning was just kind of a fun way to introduce everyone back into this movie. And we talked about earlier about people getting airlifted out and how it's kind of unusual, but I thoroughly enjoyed that aspect to that movie, to the movie, how it starts. I thought it was just a really cool like heist scene, and to me it shows what they've been doing for the past, again, we don't know how long. It seems like weeks to me, but it could have been months, it could have been years for all we know. But clearly they're picking up kids, and it's a good way to introduce what they're doing. They're going and they're picking up these kids and they're taking them away and they're doing that, so it makes perfect sense. So I just really enjoyed how this movie started.
Yeah.
It was just really cool.
Yeah.
The other thing that I have, and we touched on this earlier, is Gally was one of my favorite characters as an antagonist in the first movie. And having him show up again in this movie, I loved. The thing is so funny, I was watching this movie with Jackie, and there's a reveal in the movie. There's a reveal, so you don't know who they're talking to, you don't know what's going on, and it was like this shot of him from behind, and he turns his head and then lifts the mask off, right? Well, there's a pause there, and during that pause, I yell at Jackie, "Oh my gosh, is that Gally?" And she was like, "What?" And it turns out, and he takes his mask off, bam, it's Gally. And I was just like, no way! Now they have to explain how the hell this happened, because he was dead in the first movie.
The thing is, and I'll do you one better, I knew it was him on the truck.
Nice!
The very first time he sees him, there was just something about that camera angle and the way that he was carrying himself. Yes, I was like, Gally.
It's his posture.
Yeah.
He has a very unique and maybe this has to do with like how in tune the actor is with this character, but there's something about the way he carries himself that you know it's him immediately, and it's like so weird, because I feel like that's really a good credit for this like this actor to be in this like really weird series, you know, and like have this character who is good enough that I notice him without knowing who it is. Like, yeah. I'm like, that's Gally. It's just like so cool.
I knew it in that when he's on the back of the truck and they filmed it in a way, I was just like, yeah, that's SOB. I think we're getting Will back here.
Oh, yeah.
So I was just really happy about it.
I was happy too. To me, it was one of the, like, happiest moments in this movie. Like, I actually was emotionally involved. I was like, yes, this is good. I like this. and that having that feeling during watching a movie is rare. It doesn't happen all the time. So for something like that to happen and for it to pay off and for him to have this huge role in this movie, I really enjoyed. I love that you have this, like, antagonist turned protagonist, and I even love his attitude about it too, because it also fits Gally, where Gally's just like, yeah, this happened, I understand why you want to hate me, but we have to get this done. And that's all there was to it. He, there was no, crazy, emotional thing or whatever, because that's not Galley. He's just this is how it is. It's yeah, I get it. I totally understand. I killed Chuck. I wasn't in my right head, but I understand. And he just didn't care. He was just but that was then, this is now. And then that's just how it was. And I just love that about his character. And seeing him show up throughout this movie was great. And along with that, one of my favorite scenes of the movie is when they do that ridiculous freaking jump out of the building. Oh, God. Oh, my gosh.
So that jump scene, I started laughing my ass off because it was so amazing.
Right.
It's such an amazing sequence that I rewatched it twice, and I remember thinking, oh my God, that's intense. It was such an intense scene when they jump into that pool. And it happens in movies, but I was like, you're kidding me. You're kidding me. These idiots are going to die. It happens all the time, but there's something very different about how it feels. So the fact that you said that as your second thing, I about lost my mind when they did that ridiculous jump.
It was so, I don't know what it is, but it's the way it was filmed, the way they reacted to what they had to do.
Right, yeah.
And then they just decided to do it. And they jump out and they land in the water. And I just love Galley showing up, because that's the first time you see him as in a while from this entire event, these entire sequences of them trying to get inside Wicked. And he's because he leaves with all the people, and then he's just gone. You don't know where he's at. And for him, the first thing he shows up, and I love this subtle look up, and then look at them and goes, "You guys are crazy," and then they just ran, and that was I love the subtle look up. He witnessed the whole thing, and the fact that it was acknowledged was so fulfilling for me, because I was because usually that's the other thing when you have movies like this, when somebody does something ridiculous, it usually ends to a cut to somewhere else. So they're usually getting out of the pool, and then it cuts to whatever, meanwhile, while all this other's going on. But to have Galley acknowledge this was so great to me. I was just that's the correct reaction, because that's nuts what they just freaking do. I love that scene. I love it so much.
It just...
And I don't get it.
Wow.
How many movies have we seen where somebody has done this?
So many. But
why
the
is
fact that
so
you and I
better?
both watched it apart,
right?
And both had the same reaction means they just knocked that out of...
They knocked it out of the park. They did it perfectly well. I don't know. It's so crazy. It's unbelievable. I just couldn't believe it. So, other than just I really enjoyed the beginning. I loved Galley, and the only other thing I want to mention is, of course, having Minho back in this movie was just great. I loved all the sequences with him in it, and I love that he's kind of just a little crazy, because they've essentially been torturing him medically for an extended period of time. So to have this character kind of go through this extreme, and having the specifically the scene you were talking about earlier where he wakes up back in the maze is also a really great scene, and I just really enjoyed that whole sequence and all the stuff with Minho. And I really enjoyed that he actually, at the end of the movie where Minho where they have to run, and there's a little, again, that's another little harken back to the first movie, where it's well, Minho, you can run back and get the cure and come back. And I'm and they both look at each other as if they acknowledge, okay, he's probably the best one that's capable of doing this, because he's done crap like that in the maze a lot.
Yeah.
So having that extra little step tossed in there, I really enjoyed too. And so that's all I have. So what do you got?
Nice. Well, even though I hated to see it happen, and I kind of understood that maybe it needed to, I thought the scene with Newt fighting fighting the sickness within, and then fighting Thomas, trying to kill Thomas. I thought that was a real powerful moment, and I loved it. I wished it could have ended in some other way, but I understood that, now Thomas had to, like, that was going to be the thing that forced him to go and end everything at Wicked.
Yeah, and it's a shame to see Newt go. I mean, it was so funny because for some weird reason Newt is a character. He's been there since the beginning. He doesn't have a lot of lines, but his character is powerful enough to where I felt really bummed when Newt dies in this movie. I was just like, shit, they couldn't have kept him alive somehow, and like that was like how I felt about that scene. Like, I was kind of upset. I was just like, damn it, like, they couldn't have figured some way to get him to stay alive, and it just didn't. It just ended up not happening. And so I agree that is a very powerful scene. It's just a really sad scene. You're just like, damn it, I really, even though Newt isn't in a lot of the movies, he's in all of them, but he doesn't have a lot of lines. He's kind of there, and he's kind of the voice of reason that happens in all of the movies. Yeah. And so, with that said, to have that character just kind of die, you're just like, shit, the hell? Like, that's kind of how I felt about that scene.
That is tough. I really loved the action sequences. I think that's something that these films have done an amazing job of, and I think at the core they're thrilling. They're thriller movies anyway.
Yes,
it's a dystopian thriller.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
So I think they handle that well all the time. Like,
I agree.
And one of my favorite scenes to see was really when Minho was having to run from one of those creatures, and just that whole mind trip that they had him on while they were trying to extract his DNA or like get the cure from him. I mean, that whole scene is just like, God, you hate seeing characters you care about get tortured, but I love that he fought back and fought to free himself, and while his buddies were coming to save him.
Yeah, it was such a great scene, and to have them kind of meet up together again was also a great sequence. And it's always nice. You hate to see your characters get tortured like that. And which, by the way, I still, after watching all three movies, I don't understand why they put them through the maze and through these medically induced terrifying dreams or anything like that. I don't know why they do any of that to help them find a cure. I'm not sure they never really explain why they have to put them in this state to get the cure out of them. So it's just kind of a weird thing. But whenever you see that happen, it was nice to see him overcome that. Yeah. It was.
And I just think part of me, and because these are all really young actors, and they were even much younger when they started. So
yeah,
I kind of felt like it was great. Like Will is just such a strong. Like he probably had the most experience at anyone there in the original cast, but of the young ones anyway. But I just felt like it was nice to see them all grow up. Like, I thought they were all really much stronger in terms of their talent by the time the third movie finished. So I think that's my last like. I enjoyed watching them mature as these talented artists, and I think they all are pretty talented.
Yeah.
For a lot of different reasons.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And definitely, as I was going through this list of cast members, all of these characters are in other things now, and they are all, some of them have bigger roles than others. Dylan O'Brien ended up getting his own movie. And of course, Rosa Salazar got her own movie also. But I mean, all of these characters have other things they're doing. Some of them are in TV shows and everything. And it's nice to see all of these actors kind of get more recognition and get better things, because we did see them grow up as actors. And I think it's really cool, because one of the things that I loved about the first Maze Runner movie is I thought everyone was solid, you know?
Yeah.
And that's difficult. It's not easy to get a bunch of essentially kids that don't have much experience in acting to show up and be solid. And I didn't have very many complaints about the acting in any of these movies.
Right,
so, yeah, so it's hard to do that when you're working with a bunch of people without experience. So it was nice. It was nice to see that happen. So I guess we're just gonna go ahead and rate this.
Sure.
So I'm gonna go ahead and say I'm gonna rate it two ways. I'm gonna rate this third movie, for instance, is, I'm just gonna say, unless you've seen the rest of the movies, you should probably just skip it. But I think if I rate the series as a whole, I definitely think it's worth giving it a rent to just kind of see a dystopian thriller and really appreciate the things that are done really well. There are definitely plot holes. There are definitely things wrong with kind of how everything comes together. But the series as a whole, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a really solid dystopian thriller that was a young adult fiction book. You know, I think it's a solid series, and so I say it's definitely worth renting all of them and watching all of them through.
Yeah.
Now the hard part is the third movie is impossible to find.
Okay, that is the other little caveat.
There's a problem with, there's some weird reason, I'm not sure what happened, because trying to rent the third movie was so difficult, because there's some sort of deal they have going on where you have to do like Cinemax, and you have to do like a trial of Cinemax, and then from there you can actually watch it. And so there wasn't any other way to do it. There wasn't like a rental. You could either do a Cinemax trial, or you would have to do
or you just have to buy the movie.
Or just buy the movie outright. So it was rough to find this movie. So we had to do, I had to buy a trial and then watch it and then cancel the trial. That's what I had to do.
So, I mean, that's the other little caveat too, is because it's not like we can just say, look, all three of these movies are going to be on Netflix one day. Yeah. That probably isn't going to happen. And it's funny to me that one movie in particular, like all the streaming rights, you know, and all the revenue that they might have gotten for rentals. Yeah. They didn't get, because Cinemax bought the rights to have that exclusively.
Yeah, it's really interesting that happened. And
so it almost doesn't give it a chance to live again, you know. Yeah. Which I think is a shame. I think you're right on the money. I will say this about the series. I think it's absolutely worth watching. And I think that's something, you know, if you're a fan of thrillers and, you know, this is a really good series to tackle on a weekend, you know, and you know, and there are times when it's really thought provoking, and it's so I think it's worth a binge. I wish it was easier for people to go and watch all three of these films.
Yeah, I wish that too, because I think the first two you can still just watch on like Amazon Prime or something, like on Prime Video. I think you can still watch those without the Cinemax, but for some reason the third movie you can't do that. It's really weird. And I remember the thing that also frustrated me is we've waited so long to do this one, and it was on HBO until like May of this year. So we could have easily,
yeah,
we could have easily have seen, like, I think they had all of them on HBO, but you definitely could have at least saw The Death Cure on HBO, except it, like, they got kicked off on, like, May 31st, and so it's just like, oh, that's unfortunate. So it was on there for, like, a couple of months ago, but it's just been a thing. I've, like we said, we've rated all three of these movies, and I think the series is solid. I think the things to take away is, if you like a thriller movie, they do those scenes beautifully well, and I think if you can get that sort of feeling and that sort of emotion and that sort of dynamic camera angles and all that in other thrillers, it would make those thrillers better. I think they did that very well. I think the acting is solid, and I think the story is simple, but I think the story at least sort of makes sense enough to where it's an enjoyable ride as a thriller. So that's all I have to say.
I think you're right on the money, buddy.
All right. So let's go ahead and sign out there, Jones. If anybody wants to contact us, we always have our home on the web at halfpastpodcast.com.
Like us on Facebook.
We're on iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify.
We're on Stitcher, Libsyn, and TuneIn. I love my Stitcher app.
Yeah, and we are actually on CastBox also now. That's fun.
Ooh.
I had my
shout out.
My coworker was just like, "Well, it's not on CastBox."
So I'm not listening to it.
Well, what is CastBox? So I had to like figure that out. So it was another one that I had to like add on to another one. So we're on CastBox now also. You can also contact us on our email at halfpastcast@gmail.com. That's halfpastcast@gmail.com.
Tweet us on Twitter at halfpastpodcast.
Tweet us on Twitter.
Tweeting doesn't work on Instagram, so that's why you got to use Twitter, guys.
Thank you for listening, and thank everybody for your support. And I just want to give a shout out to all the fans that's managed to survive this long with this podcast, especially the ones that have listened to all of the Maze Runner podcast. You have successfully finished the Maze Runner series with us at Half Past Podcast. So thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a good time.
Much love. What is next for us, by the way?
We are going to do, even though I'm wearing my Lion King shirt.
Thank you for not making me watch that freaking movie.
I think it would have been an okay review. Okay. I don't know. But our next one, I believe, is going to be Hobbs and Shaw.
Yep.
I think we should do Hobbs and Shaw. Hobbs and Shaw is our next one, so that'll probably be out in the next, week or two. So we'll see what we can do, but that'll be our next recording.
Awesome.
So we'll have a fun time. I believe on the Spider-Man Far From Home podcast is where we talked about how I got that new Hobbs and Shaw trailer that just shows way too much information. You're just like, what is happening? The first trailer was perfect. Just show it. Couple of extra scenes and then do the eye bit again and then move on. I don't understand.
Right. Nope.
Yeah, that's crazy. All right, Joes, let's get out of here.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for listening. This is the Half Past Podcast. I'm Graham Ricks.
Jonesy.
See you next flick.